Hi, folks. Welcome. My name's Liberty, and I'm part of the Firestorm Collective. We are a 17-year-old group of queer and trans folks who have been running this cooperatively owned and managed bookstore since it started out downtown. And we're really excited to have you here tonight for what I think will be a great conversation that also includes some folks who are joining remotely. So welcome to anyone who's tuning in from afar. We're really lucky today to have Jacob Engelsman with us to have a conversation about lactation, particularly with a focus on queer and trans parents, but also I'm sure with insights for lots of other groups of folks. Before we get started, I just want to point out that there is a bathroom over here if you need it at any point. There's a little hall and the light will come on as you step into it. If at any point in the evening you need to get up and stretch or step outside, there's an exit immediately behind you, which you can definitely use, even though there's a sign on it that says use the other door. Don't hesitate. Or you can go out the way you came in, get some fresh air, and then rejoin us. Let's see what else, any other housekeeping. I think that's probably good. Just want to suggest to both Jacob and Corey that once we get started, if there are questions from the audience, if you don't mind repeating them, because only what's spoken into the microphone will be heard by folks who are remote. So maybe a good thing to keep in mind. So before we go any further, I just want to introduce Jacob, the author of Lactation for the Rest of Us. Jacob Engelsman is an international board certified lactation consultant, infant care specialist, speaker, and writer. His writing has appeared in Trans Bodies, Trans Selves, which you can find on our shelves, Clinical Lactation, and Everyday Birth Magazine. Jacob has spoken for the National Midwifery Institute, the United States Lactation Consultant Association, and the Association of Women's Health, obstetric and neonatal nurses on topics including lactation support and supporting gender and sexual diversity in healthcare. And I think in this moment when healthcare is under attack all around us, particularly for queer and trans folks, conversations like these in spaces like this feel more important than ever. So thank you so much to Jacob, and also thank you so much to Corey Greystone for joining today. Corey is a local doula and lactation consultant who's going to bring in a little bit of that local perspective and guide us through the conversation. So thanks to you both.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to do a brief introduction of the book, or do you want me to just start with questions?
Yeah, why don't you just start with questions? Because I feel like, yeah, I'll probably cover all the bases talking about the book. So
yeah. Well, my first question is going to be what got you into the field of lactation, which I think will cover some of why you wrote the book.
Yeah, so I got into lactation pretty late. It's definitely a second career for me. And the short story is that when I was 15 years old, I got a job at a fast food restaurant and traveled around a lot. And if you can cook, you can get a job anywhere. So I just worked in food service until I was 30 because that's, what you do. My spouse has a very specific career plan. So yeah, so there was a lot of moving around, and so I just would go from restaurant to restaurant. But then when they got through grad school, and we like to say when they got their first big boy job, we decided that it was kind of like it's my turn to figure out what I really want to do, because I was done working in food service. I had worked in every conceivable genre of cooking and restaurant work, and I was done with that. And what I really wanted to do, I knew two things. I wanted to take care of babies, and I didn't want to go to med school, not trying to be a pediatrician. So I decided what my ideal job would be. I looked it up and learned that the word for that was postpartum doula. So we had just moved to Atlanta, and I Googled Atlanta doulas. I took a bunch of people out to lunch and took them out for coffee and had a bunch of chats. And I did a postpartum doula training. I later did a birth doula training. I realized that that's not really what I wanted to do, because what I like to tell people is that doulas, being a doula is more parent care than child care.
Yeah, 100%.
And I wanted to take care of babies. So I got a job at a lactation clinic in Atlanta called Breastfeed Atlanta, where I was working as the secretary. Basically, I was scheduling consultations, I was cleaning breast pump parts, and I was filing insurance claims. But I had my foot in the door of the local lactation birth work community, and was getting some jobs working as a nanny part-time. And after about 6 months of this, the owner of the clinic, Christy Corsi, was just like, you should just become a lactation consultant. Like, you're here all the time, you've learned a ton, you love the work, like you should just fill it, like get certified, do the stuff. And that's a whole process. It usually takes about like 3 years. It's like specific college courses, lactation specific education, and then a bunch of clinical hours. But again, I already worked in a clinic, and I didn't realize at the time actually that I was really lucky in that regard, because for a lot of people, the hard part is getting clinical hours, right?
Yeah.
Because unless you live in a city like Atlanta, then most towns have like 1 or 2 lactation clinics. So,
And they can't mentor more than one person.
they can't mentor more than one person. And yeah, so it's a much more of a process to get your clinical hours for most people. So luckily, I kind of had clinical hours handed to me, which I am now extremely grateful for.
Yeah.
Which at the time I really just took for granted. Like, don't feel ashamed to say. But it was doing that work that I realized that there's all of this information that's super relevant to the queer community, that like these specific families need this information, and there's nowhere it's being presented really. So there's books like Breastfeeding Without Birthing about inducing lactation, but it's largely written for a cis hetero audience. There's books like Defining Your Own Success about lactation after reduction surgeries, but it's written for cis women who have had reductions, not for people who have had top surgery. So like, while I'm doing this, before I'm even certified, I'm like, this book needs to exist. Also, I've worked in this field for 2 years. I have no business writing this book. But I did like open to Google Doc, and I'm like, what in my ideal world, what would this book look like, right? So I immediately like have this outline, which of course looks nothing like how the book ends up looking. But because I basically said to myself, like, all right, if by the time I am certified, by the time I am qualified to write this book, it still doesn't exist, I'm going to write this book. Because at the time, really the only thing that was out there was Where's the Mother by Trevor McDonald, which is a great book, but it's not a lactation guide. It's a memoir of a trans guy who has given birth and his lactation journey. It's a wonderful book, but it's a memoir. It's not a guide.
It's not helping new parents who are going through that same thing.
Right. It's not giving like practical advice. So, and then when I started pitching this book to publishers, another book had just come out called Feed the Baby by Victoria Ficelli, who I interviewed for this book. She's a gem. So it's disingenuous for me to say this is the only book like this, but like there's 3.
Yeah. And 5,000 for any other person who's not in the queer community.
Right. Yeah. And well, and even there's a lot of information that wasn't already in a lot of books. But it's like research that had been published, right? But new parents aren't reading the Journal of Human Lactation to find out questions about their hormone treatments, you know? So, right. So I am reading the Journal of Human Lactation. I am reading Clinical Lactation, the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, you know? So yeah, it was a gap in the literature.
So when did you start writing it, you said?
So, I mean, I started piecing things together, like 7 or 8 years ago,
Okay.
like when I started doing my lactation research and education. I really like sat down writing a book in earnest, probably 4 or 5 years ago after I got certified.
Okay.
And then not to get too like into the weeds about it, but one thing that I learned is that when you're publishing nonfiction, you don't have to have an entire book written, right? Like when you publish a novel, you need a novel. When you're publishing nonfiction, you need a sample chapter.
Gotcha.
So I got that contract, and then I had a year to write the book. Okay. So then that was February 2022, and then February 2023 they started the printing, right? So there was 2 years from when I signed the contract before the book showed up on people's shelves.
Okay. So that was like a somewhat different political climate than we currently are in.
Yes.
So especially given the Supreme Court decision yesterday, what does it feel like to be on a book tour supporting families in these communities, given the political climate where people are actively fighting to take away rights of this community?
So you sent me this question ahead of time, and I've been thinking about it.
Yeah.
And the initial thought that I had was that I'm not the kind of person who like chuck a Molotov cocktail, right?
Yeah.
But like this book
Kind of.
is my Molotov cocktail.
So that wasn't the plan going into it.
I mean, you know, it's not like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, everything was hunky dory.
Correct.
In the queer community.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel like, I mean, it definitely feels more important that I talk about it, that I do speak about it. Yeah, I'm doing as many interviews, as many talks, as many podcasts as I can, because still, like, I talk to people ahead of time for podcasts. A couple days ago, I had a conversation with somebody who wants to interview me, and as we're talking, they're like, wait, trans women can induce lactation? And I'm like, yeah. And people don't know. I still have people talk to me and they're like, I had a hysterectomy. Can I induce lactation? I'm like, yeah, having uterus has literally nothing to do with it. And it's information that people need, but you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. So basically, anyone, no matter what their anatomy, can induce lactation. At least the beginning part of it. They may face barriers because of other things with their body or hormones that they're taking, but it doesn't necessarily, the barrier isn't something physically having a uterus or not in order to.
Yeah, generally, so generally speaking, any adult person who is, like any healthy adult person can induce lactation. There's definitely differences in like, if you would need to take hormones ahead of time, like how much tissue you have to begin with. Like if I wanted to, I would definitely need to take estrogen for a long time, a lot ahead of time. The only real like 100% deal breakers are if you have any sort of problem with your pituitary gland, which is not subtle. If you have a problem with your pituitary gland, you know that. And people who have had their nipples removed. Okay. But yeah, and even if you've had top surgery and you had your nipples regrafted, you would definitely lactate if you gave birth, right? Because your body doesn't know that you've had top surgery.
Because it's
Or
based off
that part of
pituitary
your body
gland.
doesn't know. Yeah. Doesn't know that you've had top surgery. But inducing lactation would definitely be a much more of a process, but there's not a lot of overlap in the communities of people who have had top surgery and people who want to induce lactation.
Gotcha. So, because maybe some of these people don't know what inducing lactation is,
Yeah.
And have not read your book yet. Do you want to discuss a little bit about what inducing lactation is for someone who might not know?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, so short story is kind of, it's exactly what it sounds like, right? You are tricking your body into thinking you're pregnant and that you now have a hungry baby. And the kind of like the short version of how to do it that we generally recommend to people is you take birth control pills, skipping the placebo week for a couple of months, doesn't have to be the full 9 months, just to slow down your cycle. And then the day you stop taking them, you start pumping like crazy to convince your body that you now have a hungry baby.
Okay.
And there are, it is extremely one of those things where it's like your mileage may vary, right? And that's one of the tricky parts too when you're talking to people about inducing lactation, is there's like no way to predict how well or how quickly you're going to produce milk, how much milk you're going to produce. Some people, there's a million factors, right? Like some people start producing tons of milk right away. Some people pump for weeks, and it usually we tell people like 6 to 8 weeks. Some people pump for like 12 weeks and are producing drops of milk. And there's really, it's extremely difficult to tell how it's going to work for you. Now, if you have experienced lactating in the past, then the process is technically something different that is called relactation. And a lot of times I talk to people about that. Like people will talk to me that, you know, they breastfed their baby for, you know, however long, and that was 3 years ago, and sometimes they still leak when they hear a crying baby or when they're having sex or something. And I'm like, yeah, like if you started pumping regularly, you would probably just start producing milk. Like if you're leaking, you're still like technically producing some amount of milk. So yeah, like just start pumping and see how it goes.
It's so funny because most of what you're saying, so I am a certified lactation counselor, which is a step below an international board certified lactation counselor. So not as much of the medical clinical training that you've had, but so much of what you're saying is paralleling what I would tell anyone who's going to lactate, is that there's so many factors. It's nuanced per person. Like, you know, there's so many factors to consider: your tissue, what your body is doing, what happened to you if you were the birthing person, your medical history, so many things. But I think there's such a gap between professionals using the same philosophy that they're using with a cis heterosexual couple, and the queer and transgendered couple. So like, what can we do as lactation consultants to become more inclusive and like using more language or education and trainings and things to kind of match that? Because it seems so interesting that everything you're saying really does parallel what is our job already. But
yeah, that's the thing, is it's the same but different, right? Like if you've got two women, one of whom is giving birth, and then her wife wants to induce lactation, right? That's no different from a cis hetero couple who's adopting a baby who wants to induce lactation, right? The end result is the same, or somebody who has a surrogate who wants to induce lactation. And so it's really just a question of, right, just a question of language and culture and that sort of thing. So there are specific trainings that are available. So like I said, there's my book, there's Feed the Baby by Victoria Ficelli. There's a few other books on birth support for queer families. There's one specifically called Supporting Queer Birth by AJ Silver that I highly recommend. But then there's online trainings. One that I really like is from the BADT, Birthing Advocacy Doula Training.
Okay.
I believe is the, yes, Birthing Advocacy Doula Training. There's another company called Lactation Education Resources that I did a webinar for on how to be more gender inclusive in your clinical space. But what a lot of it boils down to is, so aside from like the things you would do in a clinic specifically, right? Like to show allyship, but like personally, read books, do trainings about supporting queer families. And this is what I always tell people when I'm doing this talk at conferences is, whatever you're interested in, wherever you live, there is a queer history to where you live. And if you live in a city, there's a book about that. I 100% promise you. And any other interest you have, there's a queer history to it. And there's a book about it. Okay. I promise you.
Firestorm about Asheville.
There are, that's the thing. So, a lot of lactation people that I'm talking to, it is a very 99% of my colleagues are cis women. So there's a lot of overlap in interests, right? So like fashion, like, yes, there's a million queer interest, queer, there's so much queer history about that. Literature, there's so much queer history about that. But then even things like right now, gaming is super popular, right? Like everybody's into Dungeons and Dragons. Like there's a queer history to Dungeons and Dragons. There's a queer there are queer stories in the automotive industry and there's movies about it and there's books about it. So yeah, whatever interest you have, learn the queer history of that interest.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. I have a friend who just started the Gamers.
Nice.
Gaming, so
nice.
I was like, oh, that's good. So when we're talking about having time to pump, you're talking about pumping.
Yeah.
And so with any of this, especially with anyone who is inducing lactation, or maybe a couple who are both trying to lactate or have come from top surgery, which you mentioned that most of those things are going to come with a lot of extra support needed for lactation, both physically with like, I know you mentioned a lot how your support is mostly virtual. So you don't necessarily have to help a starving baby who is having a problem latching. You are helping in the process beforehand for the person.
Yeah. I do a lot of information seeking.
So do you find that your job really also involves counseling and kind of supporting through the way as things change? Because their plans may change more and stuff. So your job is knowledge and lactation as well as like counseling.
Yeah. So with inducing lactation, one of the things that I talk about in the book, but I talk about a lot in general, is the need to discuss expectations and goals, right? And especially with inducing lactation, but really with lactation across the board, is how do you expect this is going to go? Like, what are your plans, and what are you going to do if those plans aren't coming to fruition, right? Because especially on the subject of inducing lactation, there's no there's not a lot of a way to tell how it's going to go. So if you are 8 to 10 weeks in pumping consistently and you're still not producing a lot of milk, if your initial plan was, I'm going to provide 100% of the baby's calories, then we have to have a conversation about like, okay, producing 100% of the baby's calories probably is not on the table. Do we want to talk about formula? Do we want to talk about donor milk? What is plan B?
So you mentioned donor milk. Do you find most of your clients use that if they need to supplement lactation in some other way?
I feel like it's donor milk is often, like what people would prefer to do, right? People would almost always prefer to give their baby human milk, even if it's not coming from them, which is, by the way, like a wonderful thing to do. I'm 100% team donor milk. The trick with it is, access. Like, do you live in a place where you can get it
safely?
Right. Because, if you have friends or family who are lactating, or, people who have a stash of milk they didn't end up using, which happens a lot, then that's great. But then you've also, some people are in a position where they want human milk, but they don't necessarily know the people from whom it's coming. And then it becomes a very personal thing. Like, okay, like it's a friend of a friend. How much, how comfortable am I with that if it's somebody I don't actually know? But then, if it's like your best friend and they say that this person's cool, then so it just becomes this very personal thing.
Yeah.
And then there are a lot of organizations too that do milk banking. So there are milk banks that are, what is the big one? Human Milk Bank Association of North America collects donor milk. They almost exclusively give their milk to neonatal ICUs. And every once in a while will have milk that they can give to the community. But there are a lot of local organizations, Eats on Feets, Human Milk for Human Babies, that are, they have like local chapters.
And they're more regulated than just like you go to Facebook and say, who's got milk for me?
And I don't even know if regulation is the right word, but they at least have like a reputation they're trying to maintain than just Facebook rando.
I do know one of the regulations, you're not allowed to buy it. That's the one big thing, is no purchasing of milk in any of the groups. But have you ever found that anyone is unwilling to share donor milk because they know it is going to go to a queer or trans family?
That has never come across my radar, but like, I'm 100% sure that happens. But to be honest, it has never come across my radar that somebody has been refused milk because they're queer.
And I do think there's probably some people who would happily induce lactation or relactate if it was a friend that they were trying to help who was in the queer community, that they could knowingly provide milk for their baby. So there's other people out there doing that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, we're here in Western North Carolina. So during all of that, I actually was working with infant and young child feeding during emergencies. There was a team established, Safe Infant Feeding. So we were really focused on keeping babies safe. So we dealt a lot with what happens after a devastating hurricane and how babies are kept safe. So there's a lot of barriers to that when you don't have access to water or heat. But then in the queer and trans community, obviously there's even more if they're dealing with a natural disaster. Do you have any tips or tricks that you could give for someone who might be trying to prepare for a potential upcoming natural disaster and like know that they will need lactation support or feeding support of some way for their baby during that?
So lactation support during disasters is like this whole other specialty.
For sure.
That they do trainings for. And I can't speak too much about it because it is very much out of my wheelhouse, right? It's this whole other field. But one thing that I do think is important that people don't necessarily consider is that powdered formula isn't good if you don't have access to potable water.
Correct.
So if you're going to stockpile formula, you need pre-mixed,
ready to feed formula.
yes, ready to feed formula. That's the phrase. And then also, but aside from that, it's like, chargers and like things to keep your pump going. You can get manual hand pumps, which, are wildly unpopular because they're a pain to use. But have one stashed with your emergency supply kit, because it's the kind of thing that it's a hunk of plastic that has a shelf life of forever. And if you do, you buy it and you never use it, like it's better to have it and better to have it and not need it.
And the hand pumps aren't super expensive,
right?
In the pump world.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. My question just went out of my head on that one. I'll go to another one. So let's see. Okay. So supporting families after they or when they're going through any of these journeys. So obviously the US is not very like maternal, paternal, parental leave focused. They don't really value that. So most people are getting very little time off with a new baby of any kind, much less a safe place at work to pump and do all that, even though there is legislation technically in place that is supposed to do that. Is there anything for someone who is, inducing lactation or is lactating to support their non-gestational baby, and families dealing with that? Because obviously if you are inducing lactation, you're doing it quite frequently. Like it's not twice a day. It's not, just on your lunch break. So is there anything in place to kind of help, or is there anywhere that you could direct someone who's going through that journey?
So the thing about the Pump Act is that it provides or it specifies, that there should be a space for pumping, like a safe enclosed space for pumping for a year after the birth of the child. So for people inducing lactation,
There's no child.
Right. Right. It's totally up to your employer how they're gonna do that. One of the things that came to mind when I read that question was about a year or so ago now, a friend of mine was in charge at his job. He was in charge of putting together like a lactation room, which, first of all, so then he calls me because he knows, right, I just wrote a book about lactation, and I'm like, we are two cis guys who are the ones in charge of this lactation room. Super.
Yeah.
But one of the things he asked me about, because he knows nothing about it, right? Like he's just in a management position, and somebody basically gave him a pile of money and was like, we need you to make a lactation room.
We got to fit this pump back.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that he asked me though was, when I get pushback on this and people are like, why can't you just pump in the bathroom? Like, what is the answer I can give people that is not basic human dignity, right? And I was like, you're making food. Like that's why. Because you're making food, you can't do it in the bathroom. And he was like, genius.
Yes.
Because that's
Nor
in
should
theory,
you have to do it in your car,
right?
Nor should you have to do it in a tiny closet.
But especially not a bathroom.
Especially not a bathroom, yes.
yeah. And then the sideline, I think that didn't even end up being a lactation room. I think it's officially a wellness room. Oh, because that was the other thing, is they wanted it to be multi-use. And I
Okay.
was like, the room where people are going to pump cannot be the room where you go when you're having a panic attack, because
Yeah.
pumping happens on a schedule,
Yeah.
right? People need to be able to lock that door.
Yeah.
It can't also be the panic attack room.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah. So do you think in those instances, it's just really going to depend on the person's job and what field they're in and how
Yeah.
willing their bosses are to kind of support their journey?
Yeah. It's really just up to your boss whether or not you can pump.
Yeah. It's really sad because not everyone has great bosses. So
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what other. So speaking of pumps, there are lots. There are electric pumps. There are hand pumps, like you mentioned. Do you have a specific pump you normally recommend to people, or a specific type of pump that you normally recommend to people? Because it is, they're going to use it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to spend a lot of time with it.
Mhm.
And like, what would you say is like most important when they're starting that journey of kind of figuring out the pump?
Okay, so here's the thing that people don't know until it becomes relevant to their life. Breast pump technology has gotten crazy in the last
Oh my
couple
God,
of
there's
years.
so many.
Yeah, there's so many, and they're so good, and they're so small.
Mm-hmm.
There's this one that it's the one that I kind of keep for like demo purposes. It's called a Minuet. It's made by Unimom. It is the size of a hockey puck and is just as good as like the briefcase ones that hospitals have.
Nice.
Yeah, it is nuts how good pumps have gotten the last couple of years. However, the thing that people don't know about pumps is that this word gets used a lot, which is hospital grade.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a hospital grade pump, because what that means is that that pump is good enough to be used by multiple people in a day. So like, even if you're inducing lactation and you're pumping 20 minutes, 8 times a day, that's a couple hours a day. Mm-hmm. But like hospital grade pumps are like 24/7, right? They're going from one, which also that sounds like weird and it's not. There are very specific parts of the pump that are reusable and parts that are
just the one part of the pump is going from room
there's
to room.
the pump kit that is owned by a person, and then the machine. Yeah, it's one of those things where I start talking about lactation stuff and I don't know what people know and don't know. Yeah. So it's like, oh, I can see how if you didn't know a lot, that would sound sketchy as hell. Yeah. No, it's not. It's fine.
Yeah, it's totally fine.
But you don't need a hospital grade pump. You do need a pump that is you don't need. So, and then we come to what are called multi-user pumps, which is again pretty much every pump now. There are very specific parts that the milk never touches, that it's fine to get passed from person to person. Another thing that's worth noting is that lately, in like the last couple of years, insurance companies have gotten very cool about inducing lactation. Used to be you give birth, you get sent the insurance pump, the pump from your insurance company, which is fine. It's not the best pump, it's not the worst pump, it's fine. It'll get you to where you're going, which is, for most people, pumping a few times a day for, 6 months or a year. However, if you're inducing lactation, a lot of the companies now, you can, call up Aetna or whoever, tell them you're inducing lactation and you need a pump. As I'm given to understand that more often than not, they'll just send you one.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Yeah.
I think there were a lot of people like making a big fuss about it, that they're just like, just send them the pump. Yeah. So we're tired of having this argument.
Yeah. So for someone who is maybe in the queer and trans community is thinking about things, what is a good resource for them to maybe try to find someone who is an IBCLC, who has knowledge in their background? Is there a way for them to, you know, you can go and find any IBCLC that works in your town, but that doesn't necessarily tell you if there's someone who's going to be knowledgeable in their specific space, might know specifically about induced lactation or the nuance between someone who's had top surgery or not. And when the top surgery happened, I think is also a big factor in stuff like that. So is there a way for someone who might be in the community to find a queer or trans friendly IBCLC?
So unfortunately, as far as I know, there's not like a network.
Mm-hmm.
There is, and this is one of those things where I say, which with much chagrin, that like Facebook is super helpful.
Yeah.
In like, because you might have queer friends who have had lactation consultants in the past that you just don't know about because you're not, you know, you don't have kids, you know, you've not heard them talking about lactation problems, but like you might have queer friends who know the good queer lactation consultant. So just, like ask people, but then ask in the social media community, like who's good and who's not good, who thinks they're an ally but is not an ally.
Yeah, which is super important.
Yeah.
And you mentioned most of your job, a lot of your job is doing it virtually. So they're not necessarily stuck in their one little area of support for that, because you can support induced lactation for someone without being in person. Yeah,
that was one of the things that we learned about during the pandemic when we started doing telehealth.
Of the pandemic.
What's that?
One of the benefits of the pandemic was that we could do this.
Right. Well, and we learned, like the lactation professional community basically learned that 75% of our job can be telehealth, right? Unless there is a specific problem with a baby's oral anatomy or a parent is having like some sort of problem with their tissue, there's really like no reason to be in person. And even like parents who have like mastitis or like engorgement, if it's not too bad,
which is a breast infection, in case you don't know what mastitis is.
Oh yes, yeah,
or an infection in the chest, in the tissue.
Unless there's some sort of like major problem, we can do a lot of lactation support telehealth, and especially if it is preemptive, right? Then you don't even necessarily need a local lactation consultant. You can call up somebody like me, like Victoria Ficelli, as well as others in the community. And A, we can answer the initial questions you have, but B, like I might know a good lactation consultant, right? Like there's a few of us who are specializing in queer support and we all know each other.
Yeah.
Right. So if you live in Edison, New Jersey, I got a lactation consultant for you.
Right. Well, so in that regards, if there's someone who is in like a lactation adjacent field, doula work, the medical field, something like that, and they are in the queer and trans community and they want to become an IBCLC so that they can then go and support their community, what's the best way for them to get started doing that lactation work?
Okay, so I would definitely say, this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation, that step one is find out where you can get your clinical hours. Because for a lot of people, that's the hard part.
That's the biggest hurdle. Yeah.
If you live in a city, then it's going to be hopefully a lot easier, but.
And just for reference, it's like 250 hours, right? Or something. So, and a visit is usually like an hour and a half. So you're seeing a lot of,
it depends,
takes a long time.
It depends on, it depends on which pathway you're doing, which is what your history is, right? Yeah. So if you're already an RN, then you've already got all the education. I think you need 1,000 clinical hours, but if you're an RN, you work at a hospital.
Yeah.
So
but if you're a doula who doesn't have the clinical,
right,
or you're a nanny,
right,
or something,
right. When I started doing this, I was a wine and cheese guy. So I did it's pathway 3, which is like you're coming from an outside field. So I had to do all of the education plus 500 clinical hours.
Okay. And yeah, with one baby, it's usually one visit is 1 hour to 2 hours, right?
Yeah. So with clinical hours,
so 500 babies basically.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and then it's one of those things where like other work in the lactation clinic, even if you're not seeing a baby specifically, an hour is like 3/4 of a official hour. So so there's a little bit of like an algorithm there to figuring it out. But yeah, so I think 500 is the minimum number of hours you need. But yeah, so the organization that does that, the organization where you get your IBCLC is IBLCE, which is the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners. And so through them, you submit an application to begin the process, and then you've got, I think it's 3 years or 5 years to do all the steps. But yeah, step 1 is really find out where you're going to get your clinical hours, because that's the hard part, and then go through IBLCE. And then it's another one of those things where it's get online and start talking to people who did it recently, because one of the big gripes with IBLC is their interface is not user friendly. So it's like how you actually do it is not very easy to figure out from the website. You really need another lactation consultant to walk you through it.
Gotcha. So find someone that you actually want to spend some time with, in the lactation community. And start spending a lot of time with them. It sounds like,
yeah, absolutely. And then, but then another one of the things that people have to do that there are a lot of questions about is 95 hours of lactation specific education. But there are a lot of organizations that just have that as a package. Where it's just like 90 hours worth of webinars you can buy for couple $100 and then just like watch them at your leisure. So that's one of those ones that everybody gets all antsy about, but is actually pretty straightforward. There is definitely a cost barrier to becoming an IBCLC, especially because sometimes lactation consultants not only don't pay their interns, but charge their interns for education. And you don't really get a say in that, which shame.
Yeah. Shameful for sure.
So there's that aspect of it too.
So money and time.
There's money and time.
Well, speaking of time, I think we have a little bit of time before we open up to audience questions, but I just kind of want to know what an initial consult with someone. So a new set of parents have come to you, or someone who's going to become a parent soon, and they are planning to induce lactation, and kind of what that looks like for you as like your initial consult with someone who may have a different path to lactation than the cis heterosexual woman who is, it's so natural for them, which it's not either, but that's another, that's another talk. That's another day.
Yeah. So again, I think one of the most important things to talk about that gets overlooked is like what your expectations are, what your goals are, what we want to do if you can't reach those expectations and goals. And I think one of the other big important things is just like, what is your history? Are you taking hormone treatments for any purpose? And one of the things that I talk about when I'm talking about how to make your clinic more lactation, more friendly for queer and trans communities is that somebody's gender assigned at birth is not relevant to lactation necessarily. The relevant questions are, what are your pronouns now? And did you give birth to this baby?
Mhm.
Then it becomes a question of, are you taking any hormone treatments, right? But
Mhm.
people take hormone treatments for all sorts of reasons,
Yeah.
regardless
You're not
of
trying to
whether or
find
not
out
they're trans.
anything else about it other than what that impact on lactation is going to have.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then there's other things like, there are certain medications that a lot of people are told you can't lactate if you're
Mhm.
taking, when really it's a question of lactation is more difficult if you're
Mhm.
taking them. There are very few medications
Mhm.
that make it so you can't produce milk, right? Like for a lot of those, like the purpose of the medication is to cease
stop, yeah.
lactation. Or medications that make it so that your milk cannot be given to a baby, right?
Mhm.
That is
There's
a
very
very,
few.
short list. So, but it's a very short list, but it's important.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, a lot of questions of medical history. Are you willing to, like, if you are taking hormones, if you are taking estrogen and or progesterone, you're probably going to need to at least cut back on those, because those are actually lactation inhibitors, right?
Mhm.
They produce, they encourage cell growth, but inhibit lactation,
Mhm.
which is why, when you're pregnant, you don't start lactating until after you've given
Yeah.
birth. So, and then talking about pumping, which I feel like that for me is a very tricky part, because it's a question of explaining just how much you're going to be pumping without sounding like I'm trying to talk you out of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of pumping for a long time before we're going to expect to see any milk.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's a part-time job for 6
Mhm.
weeks with no payoff for 6
Yeah.
weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Often, and then we have people who, start producing milk. And then we talk about other signs of you're on the right track, right? Like, if you're getting growth, if your chest feels different, if you're
Mhm.
more sensitive, then even if you're not producing milk, these are encouraging signs.
Yeah. Nice. And then how often do you think you're usually seeing clients, like the same clients on repeat?
So the thing about when people are inducing lactation is, we used to talk about this in terms of, like, we would have a conversation every couple of weeks, except like the conversation every 2 weeks was the same conversation, right? It was a 15-minute check-in, not a 45-minute consultation. So once you've got the process down, then it becomes like, if there's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong. So call me if there's something wrong. Maybe let's talk when something changes, right? Even if it's not something wrong, like, all right, now that the baby's here, let's have a conversation. Or like, you're producing milk, you want to increase your supply. But for those 6 weeks, it's really just pumping and me being encouraging, and and it doesn't necessarily take a 45-minute consultation to be like, good job, you're on the right track. Right?
Yeah.
That meeting can be an email.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we probably should. Yeah, I think that was the perfect time. So
Cool.
we're going to open it up to questions and answers from the audience. Yeah. Okay.
I induced lactation.
Congratulations.
This is kind of about misconceptions. It was 9 years ago.
Okay.
I didn't have the support I had from healthcare providers was me going to my healthcare provider and being like, this is what I'm doing, and being like, never heard of this, I'll look it up, okay, I'll help you, but not anyone that had experience with it. Both from like peers and from NICU nurses, there was the misconception that my milk was somehow not enough. So I wanted to talk about the quality of the milk, but also talk about other harmful misconceptions that people might face.
Okay. So just to repeat, you induced lactation 9 years ago, you said? Okay, so you got a lot of people who were concerned about the quality of the milk you were making because it was an induced lactation, not a lactation that happened directly after. And they thought that your milk was not the right quality of milk for the baby. Okay. Do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, no, that's nonsense, like, is the word that comes to mind. Yeah.
How's the baby today?
Yeah, no, there is no reason to believe that the quality of milk would be like different at all. And and which kind of like brings us to the topic of quality of milk, which is that like any of the milk you're producing like is always going to be like high quality and what your baby needs.
Mhm.
There's very little that you can do like with your diet or anything to like affect, like make your milk more or less healthy, right? So that's one thing that I tell parents a lot, that like eating like a super balanced, nutritious diet is not necessarily going to make more nutritious milk than if you can just get yourself to a drive-through and eat some Big Macs.
Yep.
Like keep taking your multivitamin, right? Like that's what I take your prenatal vitamin, because
Drink
those are the
water.
same vitamins you need, and stay hydrated, right? Yeah. And also like, if you don't want to drink water, like put a little Crystal Light flavor packet in it, or like you need to be drinking the water, but like making the water taste better is not going to make it any less water.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's still water.
And our human milk is mostly water as opposed to a lot of other mammals. So
yeah.
Water is very, very important to the journey.
Yeah. Now I will sideline here and mention caffeine, which will get into your milk.
Correct.
And if you are going to, if you're a big coffee drinker, like that's fine, but you and it's not enough to like negatively impact your baby, but it might be enough to like make your baby have a little bit of a harder time falling asleep. So if you do drink a lot of coffee in the morning and then you pump, just like and then like freeze it or something, just label that AM milk. That's morning milk.
That makes sense. But nothing to like with someone who's induced lactation.
No,
that the milk is
that's nonsense.
Is no different.
No.
So. Did they ever test your milk?
No.
Okay. It was all assumption. Okay. Good for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I saw a lot of people discuss relactation and inducing lactation after the hurricane, I was mostly shocked that a lot of people actually knew about that.
Yeah.
Because there were so many people who lost their whole stashes when the power went out. So people who were ready to feed their baby for however long after the hurricane, and then they lost their whole stash. And there were other people who were like, I'll do this, I'll try. And I was like, oh, actually people know about this. Like, good for you for saying that. But also I'm surprised you know about it, but I do think it is becoming somewhat more common for people to know about it than maybe 9 years ago.
Yeah. And it's, the more we talk about it right now, it's growing exponentially. Now everybody in this room knows about it.
Yeah.
Now there's a real estate guy in Ohio who knows about inducing lactation.
Do you know anything about the history of like this? And you may not, but like the first person to like induce lactation and like things like that. Do you know anything about that kind of history?
So there is a really interesting book that came out a couple of years ago about like the history, like ancient history having to do with lactation. It has the extremely unfortunate name of white blood.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there might be like a translation thing going on. Yes, but it is an extremely interesting book about, and one of the things that it talks about is, well, a lot about what is that word? Nursemaids.
Oh,
Midwife. No.
the nanny, the granny midwives or the wet nurse.
Wet nurse. There we
Yeah.
go. Good Lord. Fell right out of my brain. Wet nursing. Yeah.
Which was
well,
super
and
common.
that's like, and that just goes into like prehistory,
Mhm.
right? And so, yeah, like in terms of inducing lactation and relactation, like who even knows who the first person
Yeah.
was in, ancient Sumeria?
You can start
what
your
have you.
research for a book for 5 years from now. Here you go.
So right now I'm pitching a book, kind of a follow-up to this, not about lactation, but about so a book about infant care, but again, that is written in a never assumes the gender or sexuality of the reader kind of way, called Baby Wrangling for the Rest of Us.
Nice.
But that
I
is
like
yeah, no, that's a whole other conversation.
Gotcha.
And as we're wrapping this one up, let's not start
Yeah.
the new one.
Does anyone else have any questions about anything?
This is slightly off topic, but I would just
Go ahead.
love to hear a little more about the work that you were doing and the other folks were contributing to post-Helene.
Oh, yes.
How,
Yeah.
how that came together, how it was organized,
Mhm.
how people were connected to it, especially given that the internet was not, Facebook was not there for us.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
So also I will point out more.
It's possible because I was yelling and got picked up by the mic, but if you don't mind.
Okay. Yes. So your question is about the Safe and Fit Feeding team that I was part of after the hurricane. So how we kind of got that started, and with the lack of internet, how we were connecting to things. So also Marcel is here, and she was part of that with us. She's an IBCLC as well. And so there are two lovely IBCLCs in this area who kind of saw a need. One of them works at the Lilac Birth Center. Another one works at Birthstone Breastfeeding and Wellness Center in Silva. And they, the day after the hurricane, basically came to town and immediately saw a need to kind of figure out what's going on. And there was a massive influx of formula to this area. If anyone went to any distribution site, you saw that there was formula everywhere. So there's nothing with the CDC and FEMA that will help guide you in how to properly store formula, make formula safe if you don't have water, if you don't have electricity. So a bunch of us who were just really passionate about infant and young child feeding, were helping go out to distribution centers and meeting with families. We went to the distribution centers. That's how we did it. And someone said, I'm getting this for so-and-so. And then we were like, do they need lactation help? And we just had a big meeting. There was, 5,000 families maybe something like that. 250,000 ounces of breast milk that we gave out. We had an informal human milk sharing facility at a couple different places. And so we just were making sure we were providing kits so that people could sanitize bottles and pump parts safely with cold water, and they didn't have to heat it, because we were finding people who were not sanitizing bottles because they had to heat their water to cook their food, and then they didn't have water to sanitize the bottles. And the hospital was sending people home who didn't have homes with brand new babies and not explaining the problems with that. So yeah, it was really amazing work. And the organization is now working on grants to get it out there to a lot of so that there is actually something in the CDC guidelines and in FEMA guidelines. So obviously natural disasters are going to keep happening. They kept happening while that was going on. The fires, we did a bunch of consultations with the people in California right after the hurricane when the fires happened. Just kind of trying to get more people concerned about any type of infant and young child feeding after an emergency. So thank you. Yeah. Any other questions yeah.
Sorry, I can't read. My question is, as an IBCLC, I want to be more educated. I haven't had any real experience with lactation and people that are correct language, but to be open-minded to like non-cis gender people. Are there specific resources that you can help guide people like myself who would like to learn more and be more well, be able to serve our local population better?
So her question is, we did kind of talk about this before you got here. That's okay. It's just basically as an IBCLC, how she can find resources to get some more information specifically around like maybe relactation and induced lactation for someone who is not part of this cisgendered population so that she can support them.
Yeah. So as an IBCLC, do you know LER, Lactation Education Resources?
Yeah.
They've got a few webinars on it. That's the short answer. Brina, yes. Yeah. They're a gem. I interviewed them for this book. Yeah. And then Annie Frisbee, who does paperless lactation, she's got a few as well. So yeah, check her stuff out.
And Jacob's book is very good and it's available here. So you can buy it after this. So do we have any other questions?
Well, sorry, I just wanted to ask Liberty real quick. Is there a mechanism for people watching to ask questions like through a chat?
Yeah.
There's not an easy mechanism.
Okay.
Yeah, if you wanted to say this, people could leave a comment on the video and I could read it out loud. But there's not
Okay.
like a better mechanism.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just wondering. If you
Okay.
had
So if
questions
anyone is
on-
online, would like to leave a comment on the video, you can do that. And then Liberty will read it to me and I will repeat it and Jacob will answer it.
But we did have one more.
Yeah, a couple of things. First, I know you mentioned you're already at IBCLC. I'm currently taking the agency birthing advocacy
Yeah.
course. It's probably things that you're already familiar with. That you go pretty deep into
Okay.
lactation.
I've written a
Okay.
few articles for them. They're really nice.
Yeah, I signed up for everything. Their courses I wanted. But so I'm a birth worker and also a mental health therapist based out of New Orleans.
Oh.
And something that they tell us in the perinatal mental health community is they kind of push breastfeeding as protective of mental health, but it's also very cis and hetero straight community that we're getting that information from. So I was curious if you had any other, I guess, insight into the connection between mental health and nursing.
Oh, wow.
Or if there
That's
is a connection.
That's an amazing question.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're a birth worker and a perinatal mental health professional. And your question is that we generally in the cisgendered heterosexual world say that breastfeeding is something that helps mental health, but that's not necessarily always true. And what that kind of means for other communities. Do you have anything to speak about that?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, even in a cis hetero family, it's not necessarily
Correct.
true.
Correct.
Which again is like a whole other can of worms.
Yes.
But I do feel like it's important to recognize that if lactation is causing you gender dysphoria, right? And I've known people who like the lactation after giving birth helped them with feelings of like they were being a provider and being protective, and like it actually was like gender euphoric as a trans man, because I'm protecting my young kind of feeling. But if you're not getting that, right, like if you had a hard time with pregnancy and now your chest is swollen and you're leaking milk and you're just feeling very bad about everything, and or even not even very bad about everything, just you're like, this is not right for me. It is perfectly okay to then like just feed your child formula. Lots of children just have formula. And one of the things that my mentor used to say a lot is that no amount of breast milk makes up for having a clinically depressed parent.
Correct. Yeah.
Like if that's the choice, then your mental health is more important, as long as your child is getting food, is getting calories. Like for the rest of their life, having an emotionally, mentally well parent is more important.
For sure. And I think that is not enough information out there in general for anyone who is lactating, like you said, because it's a whole nother thing where people are
Yeah.
led to believe that breastfeeding is that, or chest feeding, human milk feeding is what they should be doing, and that is the best thing for their baby. And then they start to feel like they're failing,
Yeah.
whether they're being a mentally sound person in that moment or not, and they're not thinking about their own mental health.
Yeah.
So yeah, which your question kind of, we didn't talk about it at all, but when you're answering that, I was going to say, do you want to say anything specifically about binding? Because you talk a decent amount about it in the book, like what that does for like, if someone is trying to go through that with also lactation, and any just like little work, because that is a thing that I think people would be dealing with as well.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I get a lot is when can I start binding again?
Mhm.
Because people, yeah, a lot of people will, like, even if they're planning on having top surgery, will put it off because they know they want to give birth.
Mhm.
And yeah, so they want to know when they can start binding again. And the short answer is like whenever it feels comfortable, but start at really small increments, right? Like, especially even if you're a person who used to bind like for hours a day, like start for 15 minutes at home,
Mhm.
see how that feels. Because like, you know, the last thing you want is to be like in the middle of the grocery store and all of a sudden you have shooting pain in your
Mhm.
chest. So, but yes, like when it's comfortable to do so, you can start binding again. You might end up with a higher incidence of like clogged ducts, but as
Mhm.
long as you are aware of that and you can catch clogged ducts early, and especially it's the kind of thing where people go to the lactation consultant for the first time they have one, and then afterwards they get out the
Mhm.
electric toothbrush or vibrator and just like break it up, because literally it's just a clog of milk in your duct and you can just vibrate it out and it's
Mhm.
fine.
Yeah.
Or like massage it out. And so yeah, so as long as that's like what you're aware of and you're cognizant of these things, then yeah,
Because that's a
fine.
way to kind of protect mental health too.
Yes.
Which I was thinking about with your question is if you were someone who was binding before lactation, even just being able to get back to that is a way
Yeah.
to kind of help your mental health. So kind of figuring out ways to kind of get back to your old self in some
Right.
ways. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have other questions or did you have anything from you? Nothing from there. Okay. Does
Cool.
anyone else have any questions? Okay.
So I just want to say that I maintain a very specific policy of assuming that every question is being asked in good faith, even if you don't know the appropriate language. So if anybody like online or here has a question that they feel weird about asking and don't want to ask in front of other people, you can like find me on Instagram or Google me. I am so Googleable. It is, and like intentionally, right? I am extremely easy to find online, or just like anybody here, just like take me aside and ask me a question. Yeah, I will answer any question and like assume that you're being genuine in your concern.
And trying to find out an answer because you're
Right.
inquisitive and you're trying to be more knowledgeable in
Right,
something, which
or
goes
like
back.
even just curious, but yeah,
Yeah.
like, and also like this is my favorite thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I will talk about like gender stuff and lactation stuff all day long.
I mean, if you're reading the Journal of Lactation for
Right.
fun, then obviously you'll talk about this.
Right.
Awesome. Okay. Anything else then? Okay. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to both of y'all. We do have copies of Jacob's book up by the register, and I know Jacob would be happy to sign a copy if you'd like to grab one. And just big appreciation to both of you. And I think another round of applause for both Jacob and also for Corey for being an awesome interviewer. Thank you so much.